Yo, if low-class women can call black men bullet bags, what exactly happens when you deal with white-collar, well-to-do, highly educated women? How do they refer to black men when they want to be derogatory on purpose? Hmm, let's see. Y'all know what it is. Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. This is an interesting piece that I ran across that comes to us from a scholar whose work I have enjoyed over the last couple decades. She is has a foot in Africana Studies and is also a trained economist. One Dr. Julianne Malveaux, if I'm not mistaken, right? Who's recently moved to California. And this is a piece you can find in the AtlantaDailyWorld.com, dated September 26, 2021. And it's entitled Malveaux, Thank You, Black Women, right? And here she's talking particularly about the California election that recently took place. She writes, when California Governor Gavin Newsom woke up on Wednesday, September 15, 2021, I hope he fell to his knees and said, thank you, God. Thank you, black women. To be sure, there are many others to thank, from the energized Chicanx Latinx community to the Democrats who surged to the polls at the last minute. Some of the more prominent who thronged to his side were black women, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, California Board of Equalization member Malia Cohen, and I probably mispronounced Malia, it might be Malia. Others include grassroots women whose names you'll never know, but whose mark was invaluable. They had to get out the vote drives, street fairs, voter awareness events in parks and playgrounds. They were determined that the recall effort would fail, and even more determined when talk show host Larry Elder jumped into the race as the conservative favorite. Those who worked for Governor Newsom weren't necessarily his biggest fans, but they appreciated all his work to develop a progressive agenda. They enjoyed his appointment of Dr. Shirley Weber as Secretary of State. Shirley Weber, I've seen her work with my mentor, Dr. William Little, in Southern California when she was in Florida. In San Diego. I don't know where I got Florida from. In San Diego. So shout out to her. They appreciate his support of Vice President Harris and President Biden. Despite his flaws and unforced errors, they appreciated his leadership on COVID matters like the French Laundry debacle. And they turned up and turned out, although with laggardness that put the outcome of the recall in doubt, especially in mid-August when Elder was polling very close to Newsom. Democrats ought to be ashamed that things got that close. In a state that has twice as many Democrats as Republicans, there should never have been a question about the outcome of the vote. Frankly, there never should have been a recall election at all. But if Republicans can't get their way the old-fashioned way by winning, they'll try to renegade way by stealing. So we were treated to allegation after allegation of voter fraud before a single ballot had been counted. We heard reports that some partisan poll watchers were aggressively challenging voter signatures in the name of preventing fraud. Republicans have been able to gain all these advantages because Democrats, in a word, have been sleeping, right? President Joe Biden would be the first to assert that black women made a difference in the 2020 election. Women like Latasha Brown, Melanie Campbell, Barbara Arnwine, and so many others crisscrossed the country urging people to get out and vote. Right? Sometimes it wasn't an easy case to make. President Biden has been in public office long enough to have a record that energizes some and causes others to cringe. Too many black men, around 1 in 6, believe the hype and voted for Trump. As hard as that is to understand, it's reasonable to note that black people were not a monolith and we do not vote in lockstep. Actually, for the most part, we do. But anyway, that makes the Republican embrace of arch conservative Larry Elder, he would have given reparations to slave owners, all the more cynical. Now, I want to stop here for a minute. So she's basically writing this piece praising black women and suggesting that these white politicians should acknowledge the power of white women, the dedication, the loyalty of black women, and I'm all over the place today. She's basically arguing they should kneel and appreciate the power of the black women that continue to get them elected on the left. Now, recently, Dr. Tommy Curry did some research examining in depth the voting patterns across gender and race, particularly, in a number of different communities, but especially within the Black community. And one of the things he found, even in terms of recent presidential elections, was that Black men vote second highest on the left for Democrat candidates. They vote to the second highest degree. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind about that. There's really no other group that experiences voter disenfranchisement to the degree Black men do. So, with our votes in question, our capacity to vote in question, you still have Black men that vote higher than any other demographic but Black women on the left. And more to the point, Black women don't have to deal with the level of voter disenfranchisement that Black men deal with, because that is a product of incarceration. Right? High levels of incarceration mean that our voting capacity is always challenged. Right? And that doesn't even have to do, we haven't even started to talk about the very under the table illegal ways they try to eliminate Black male votes. But my point is, here she is in this piece where out of nowhere, when she's talking about the power of Black women and the degree to which these white politicians should be acknowledging them, and of course the ills of Larry Elder, out of all of that, she drops this line that comes out of nowhere. Too many Black men, around 1 in 6, believed the hype and voted for Trump. It's interesting. I would love to actually, more closely examine Dr. Curry's results in relation to this statement. But I found it interesting that she even bothered to put it there, because she doesn't talk about Black men anywhere else. So even though traditionally, despite facing higher opposition to even being able to vote than any other demographic, Black men have actually made these elections possible in terms of voting to that degree, second highest degree, with no acknowledgement. Black men are dismissed as having ruined the last few elections before the elections even took place. That's the thing that's some of the most interesting stuff I've been hearing, especially from Black women, about Black male voters. Even before the election takes place, Black men are voting, or Black men are accused of having ruined the elections. Now, I don't care where you fall on this. See, my channel, I really don't talk a lot about politics, and I don't talk a lot about religion. Why? Those are very divisive concepts. They're divisive issues. And what I'm trying to do is talk to Black men across class, across occupation, across color, across geography, and across ideology, religion, so on and so forth. So I don't generally delve into topics that are just going to split back Black men down the middle. I generally don't, because my goal is to talk to Black men about what they're experiencing. I'm trying to reach as many as possible. I'm not afraid to deal with these topics, and some of these topics are just not my skill set. But at the end of the day, I very purposely focus on Black male issues in an attempt to bring Black men together on their shared experience and to reflect on how we can respond to these issues. But part of what I'm dealing with here is this issue that I refer to as a difference in coarse and refined forms of misandry, especially within the Black community, which we generally refer to as anti-Black misandry, which can come from white society, it can come from any particular group, but it can also come from within the Black community. And the Black community has internalized a lot of the negative stereotypes and perspectives about Black men, even to the point that Black men can practice misandry against themselves. And it happens quite frequently. I was on a post a week ago where there was a debate going on. A brother had posted something where he was actually trying to examine why too many Black men die alone in response to something that I had posted. And there was all kind of women that came in there talking about how they deserve to die alone, and they die alone because they cheat too much and they make bad decisions. All these assumptions, these very, very, at the end of the day, misandrous assumptions about Black men that are rooted in generations of negative stereotype, much of which have come from racist white scholarship and media over the generations, internalized in the Black community, much of it being spewed by Black women in this comment section. And then there was a brother that popped out of nowhere and said, well, yes, they die alone for all the reasons the women have pointed out, and that's why we just have to try harder. One of the things that a lot of brothers don't know about is how we tend to John Henry ourselves. right? This kind of John Henrying, where we take the criticism, we take the skewed examples that others give us, other demographics, even within the Black community, and we carry it like it's true, for one. And then for two, we try and muscle our way out of it because we just got to be strong. And you want to know why our life expectancy is the lowest, why we die of stress, which can exacerbate almost any significant health issue, can be dramatically exacerbated by stress. So we're not only navigating the realities of, racism, the realities of systemic racism, right? Differences in access to, wealth, to class advancement, all these. I mean, we could talk about this all day, but we make it worse because we just pound our chest and say we can get through it. And then we turn around and attack each other, right? It's kind of weird kind of way. So misandry can take many different forms. When I talk about coarse and refined misandry, what I mean is coarse misandry is this kind of stuff. This is something I talked about last year, right? This is the difference between coarse and refined anti-Black misandry, right? If you look at the top right, you see a dark blue square. This is a tweet that actually came out last year on June 16, 2020. It says, "I wish people feared their sons being pedophiles, rapists, and being abusive as much as they fear them being gay," right? Another one at the bottom says, "I seen a post calling Black men bullet bags," and another post that said, "Woo child, the cops ain't killing Black men fast enough." And both went viral within 300,000 likes, with nearly 300,000 likes and retweets and laughing comments. Recently, we know of a woman that got on Twitter and started talking about bullet bags, and thankfully she was outed, challenged, and ended up like closing her page, for all I know, from what I last heard. But this is what we're talking about, right? These kind of blatant statements where people are calling Black men bullet bags and saying they can't die fast enough. So if you look at the definition of coarse anti-Black misandry, it's the blatant dehumanization we tend to find on social media. Much of it centers around criminalizing Black men on carceral issues, right? But the question of today's video is on what I refer to as refined misandry, right? Reserved and deceptively appearing objective, especially when espoused by professional feminists. Often they base their arguments on the subculture of violence theory, arguing for an intellectual justification for anti-Black misandry rooted in racist white ethnology, right? And the whole notion of subculture of violence theory is one that I talked about with Dr. Curry on my show last year, where he talks about this idea that violence and monstrousness on Black males' behalf is something that is rooted in the culture and is tied almost by their DNA to all Black men. And this is a product of racist scholarship that Black feminists, appropriated from white racist ethnographers and white feminists. They appropriated it word for word and began to use it and apply it to their research and analyses on Black men. This is where you really started to see these kind of narratives about oppressive Black patriarchy, all these kind of things. It came about from where, you had these scholars, particularly these Black feminist scholars, appropriating these problematic narratives about Black men to closer associate themselves with white feminists and be able to access some of the benefits that were coming down the pike for essentially white women, but really white feminists. And this is the way they drew themselves closer, by pushing Black men further away. And the degree to which these things began to seep into the public consciousness through media, right? Through popular entertainment, films, television shows, talk shows, particularly in the 80s and 90s. This is when you started to see the floodgates open. And you had everyday women who had never heard of Black feminism, who couldn't tell you who Bell Hooks was, who couldn't tell you who Patricia Hill Collins was, who couldn't tell you who the Combahee River Collective were. They couldn't tell you any of that, but they had learned these misandrous talking points and internalized them to such a degree that it became a problem. It's become a problem, but it's a problem that most people don't know how to voice any critique of, because most people don't know about any of these issues. And if you do know about it, especially if you're in the academy as a man, you're going to be quiet. Why? Because there are considerably more Black women academics than there are Black men, especially if they hold administrative positions. Most Black men in the academy don't want that smoke. They don't want to worry about losing their jobs. They don't want difficulty. They definitely don't want accusations. being levied at them, about them being sexist or misogynist, simply because they don't agree or they're critical of feminism, black feminism, especially in terms of how it's traditionally treated black men. And then, of course, there's a whole other area we don't want to talk about, where men don't want to even have to deal with the threat of false accusations that often don't require evidence. They're treated as true, one, because he's a black male, and two, because the accusation was made. And I've known several black men with doctorates in their early 30s who came out of circumstances that you would never associate with them even being able to get doctorates, lose their jobs, and they're no longer able to teach in the academy based off of false accusations with no evidence. Careers over before they could even get their first full-time job, let alone tenure. Nobody talks about it. So when we talk about this difference between what I refer to as coarse and refined misandry, the refined misandry is incredibly dangerous because it comes from sources that we associate with objectivity. It appears to be a reasoned kind of thing. So when you get back to this piece that we're looking at with Dr. Malveaux, right? Out of this, it's really not a long article. I didn't finish it. But basically, she's just talking about how Newsom and others, elite politicians, need to appreciate the sacrifices of black women. In the midst of doing all of this, she has to jab at black men. She doesn't make any statements about black men whatsoever, except for Larry Elder, who is not reflective of black men as a category. She makes one statement about black men only to dismiss them as having voted too much for Trump. Now, I don't really care if you advocate for Trump or if you're anti-Trump. That's not my point. My point here is how, despite how an election after election, black men demonstrate their voting patterns, all of that manages to get ignored. And when promoting and advocating for black women to be able to advance in the Democrat Party, you find high-level feminists like this willing to stab at black men. She doesn't talk about any of it. I mean, even if you just took her words and we don't relate it to any of Dr. Curry's research on the actual voting pattern of black men, she says 1 out of 2, again, she says too many black men hold on, let me find it. Scrolling the page. She says too many black men, around 1 in 6, believe the hype and voted for Trump. Did she talk about the other 5 and 6 out of 6? Did she talk about the fact that they're the second highest demographic usually to vote in accordance with black women? Are black men acknowledged for even having, whether by the Democrat Party or black women in the party? Do any of those groups acknowledge black men's contributions? And look, I'm not a Democrat. I don't vote Democrat. I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent. Y'all know I've already talked about this. I tend to vote green more often than not. I'm not hiding my politics, but I'm simply saying I'm not producing this video as an advocation for the Democrat Party. What I'm simply pointing out is how, even when you look at people trying to advance themselves in the party, black women in particular, how easy it is to do at the expense of black men by either burying the similar voting patterns or outright jabbing at black men, even going so far to, as I said earlier, accuse them of ruining election outcomes before the elections are even over. And then patronizing black men ridiculously with these strippers on poles telling you to get to the poll and vote. This kind of bullshit is ridiculous. And the treatment of black men, even within the left, has not been thoroughly reflected upon enough. And this is why I have no problem with black men that abstain from voting, that abstain from representing any formal. Look, I tend to vote because I vote green. The biggest issue really is that I really think this two-party system is ridiculous. There need to be more parties represented. That's the main thing for me. There need to be far more parties. And I have no problem with a black male party. I don't have a problem with the idea at all. Because I don't think that we're able to get our points across using these mainstream mechanisms. But if we're going to have high-level feminists who've been pushing to get into the party and find themselves represented, if we're going to find that their primary method of getting in and relating to black men is to attack them in order to get further in, you can count me out. So as much respect as I've had over the decades for Dr. Malveaux's work, These kind of unnecessary jabs at black men, they're not helping. And for the most part, they're just reinforcing what many black men have already been experiencing, which is to too many of these different groups, we don't really matter. And so we have to determine for ourselves what matters most to us. And I would actually like to see black men pull together, where it's to formally organize a party or to just at least organize a voting bloc that has everything to do with how these policies can be read, strictly in terms of how they impact us. Because let me tell you, ain't nobody else giving a damn about that. They're not. Nobody else cares how these policies that people are voting on affect black males. They're not. And I think it's high time black men begin to ask that question. I don't care if you're an extreme conservative, an extreme liberal. I don't care if you're a hardcore revolutionary, Pan-Africanist, or if you're just undecided and uninterested, or traditionally uninterested. I'd like to see black men come to the table and say, okay, we need to start by having a conversation about how the specific policies on the books affect black men. We need to have that conversation amongst ourselves, because nobody else gives a damn. And this is why I started the Black Male Political Agenda. I did not write the points on the agenda. Black males wrote them. Right about now, I'm close to 20,000 subscribers. Those are the men that wrote the points that I have on the Black Male Political Agenda. I'm going to post that in the description so you can actually look at them. These are not points that I wrote. They're not points that are coming strictly out of the left or any of that. They're points that have been contributed to the Onyx Report by black males. And I think that's the beginning point we need to start with, right? Not only do we need to start by looking at how policies that are being voted upon on a regular basis actually affect black males of all ages, but we also need to start with what black males are talking about. So when you actually look at the Black Male Political Agenda, one of the things you'll notice is that it deals with family court. It deals with unemployment. Hell, it even deals with reparations, but each point deals with it specifically in terms of how it affects black men. Because neither the Democrat Party or the Republican Party is concerned with how their policies affect black men. And apparently some of our aspiring, political feminists that are interested in getting into positions of power could give a damn. And y'all already know what I said about BLM, which is becoming a launching pad, which has become a launching pad for many of these feminists to try and get into politics. They didn't care about black men then. They don't care about black men now. But they have demonstrated a willingness to use black male death to advance themselves, only to create policy that has nothing to do with the black men that were dying. And they're continuing to do that and being supported in doing that by the Democrat Party. So I hope you'll take a look at the Black Male Political Agenda. I hope you'll begin to become more clear about how both coarse and refined anti-black misandry function, and how regardless of class, regardless of education, black men can be told they ain't shit, whether those words are used or whether it sounds very erudite. Either way, when your votes aren't counted, nobody gives a damn about your perspective, and people are willing to use you as a step stool to get wherever they want to go, at some point you have to be able to acknowledge that if the only people that matter, the only people that believe you matter, are other black men, and that's at best, because there are plenty of black men that don't give a damn about other black men either. We need to first be able to align with brothers who at least want to have this conversation amongst ourselves. But then, and this is the biggest piece, we need to be willing to accept allies across the board. I mean, we've been hearing about this from generations. This is what Malcolm did after he got back and split from the Nation of Islam. One of the things he said was, we got to be willing to work with anybody that deals with our agenda. And that's a bad paraphrase. I'm not, trying to quote him word for word. That's essentially what he did. He recognized that there were going to be scores of people across a variety of ideologies that weren't going to support what he was talking about. But at the end of the day, you got to work with who's willing to work with you. You got to be clear enough to know that there will be various types of agents that are willing to work to undermine your goals. And you got to be willing to toe that line, especially with others who are willing to stand with you, starting with black men. So, hope you have a good day. And I hope you're able to use this to catapult the discussion to another level. Peace, y'all.